and welcome to another episode of End the Lie Radio. I am your host, Madison Rupert, and it is 2013, folks. If you're listening to this, you survived the Mayan apocalypse, as many people predicted. Probably more people predicting the end of the world, but oh well, we're all still here to continue on living. And we have a great show lined up for you, as usual, with Brandon Turbeville, writer of ActivistPost.com, and he's also the author of 3 books now: Codex, Alimentarius, The End of Health Freedom, 7 Real Conspiracies, 5 Cent Solutions, I'm sorry, I meant to say 4 books, and Dispatches from a Dissident, and you can find those all on, or all of those, rather, on thebookpatch.com. That's thebookpatch.com. And of course, my website is endthelie.com, and you can scroll on down there to the bottom and find us across the internet on various social media platforms, and follow us, and like us, and subscribe to us, and whatever nomenclature they prefer on the given social network. But at the time of this broadcast, we are getting very close to breaking the 17,000 mark. I'm sure by the time this airs, we'll be well beyond the 17,000 mark on our Facebook page. So if you are part of that wonderful NSA surveillance tool, then please do show your allegiance and click the like button, share our articles, and do comment. We really enjoy reading those. There are some pretty hilarious ones on there, but there are some very serious ones as well. And today with Brandon, we're going to be discussing a wide range of issues. But to catch up on his writing, you can go to activistpost.com. And, of course, you can also listen to his wonderful show here, Truth on the Tracks, here on ucy.tv. And, Brandon, welcome once again. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, Madison. Thanks for having me on.
So what do you want to start out with? I know before the end of the year, around the predicted apocalypse, you wrote a very wonderful article, one that I know many people appreciated, about, actually getting out and doing something. It's called "It's Time for the Aware to Take Action," and that's posted over at activistpost.com. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? And I know it has been quite popular because it's just been exploding with comments. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I really think that this was the most important article that I wrote in 2012, because I don't think that there's really any doubt that where we're at right now, that we can clearly see the world is heading toward a state of greater oppression, right? Whether this is on the international level, the national level, the state, the local level, all these levels, you can see that this is only getting worse. The situations are only getting worse. And in paying attention to current events, we see a constant replay of potential calamities and calamities that have happened in the past, the things that have been done to us, the things that are happening now, and these potential calamities in the future. Now, whether this is terrorism, whether it's sickness, the flu, bioterrorism, that sort of thing, whether it's just outright death itself, poverty, old age, natural disasters, financial collapse, the Mayan apocalypse, you name it, all this stuff. It's repeated back and forth on the mainstream media. Of course, you get a spin on the mainstream, which is, the official stories of cave dwellers and terrorism and flu viruses, that can be prevented by vaccines. But it's also repeated in the alternative media, and it's repeated more accurately in terms of perspective in the alternative media than is the mainstream, but it's all repeated nonetheless. And essentially we have this common denominator of fear. Now, whether you're an adherent to the mainstream account or not, it's still a very scary situation. On the mainstream end, the solutions are always to give up your freedom, right? If you want to be saved from these horrible things that could happen, then give your freedom up and gain some security from the government, for corporations, law enforcement, and whatnot. The alternative media, unfortunately, doesn't really have very many solutions of their own. Now, we know that the mainstream solutions are just out of hand. We've given up freedom for security that hasn't worked very well for us in the past, and it will never work well for us in the future. But nevertheless, this stuff gets repeated, and we end up in this culture of fear. Again, whether it's mainstream or alternative media perspectives here, and we just become bogged down in worrying about what's happening to us and what's going to happen, as opposed to actually doing something about those things that are happening. Fear itself clouds judgment. You don't make responses. You don't make rational responses when you're afraid. You make irrational reactions. And you could even look at this on the physical level, how fear and stress wear on the body, that they wreck the immune system, ruin the quality of life, and that sort of thing. It can, you can even go into the energetic and vibrational principles, right, of this lower vibration of fear versus the higher vibration of other experiences. But the alternative media has done a very good job at pointing out where the mainstream accounts and the official stories are wrong. And the alternative media is filling a void in that sense. But unfortunately, I've heard Alan Watt describe the whole situation that we find ourselves in now like being rats in a lab experiment. I think I've mentioned this before on this show, whereas it's like rats that are being experimented on, and every morning they get together in their cage, and they look around at each other and say, "Oh, I wonder what they're going to do to us today. Are they going to stick needles in our brains? Are they're going to put gas in the cage? Are they going to force feed us today? Are they going to hold food back from us today? Are they going to stick us underwater?" And then they compare all the things that have been done to them. This is what they did yesterday. This is what they could do tomorrow. And it's just one big group meeting of, oh my God, what are they going to do? Never any discussion of how we actually get out of the cage, just, oh my God, what's going to happen? Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't continue to report on this stuff and shed light on this stuff where we can, because it's important to know where we're at in order to try and change the situation. But I am saying that it's important that we can't simply sit around and terrify ourselves and document our own destruction and not actually fight back. I mean, what good is it if we've provided ourselves with wonderful documentations, with great journal entries of our situation, if at the end of it all nothing changed, but we have this great journal that we can hand to the people who did all these horrible things to us to say, hey, you can read this to see our perspective while you were doing it to us. This is not a very good outlook in my book. So it seems like the revolutionaries have been content to just report the news as opposed to actually revolutionizing, right? We're content to record history and not take part in it. And you can see this all across the spectrum when you see people who do come up with solutions and do try to present these solutions. They get shouted down, whether it's just petty political squabbles or just catcalls of, well, that'll never happen. We don't have the numbers to do this. You've got to have more people. It's just people aren't awake. Yada yada. All these excuses for why we can't get a win in our column. Now, I'm sure everybody understands that one of the main principles that we have to do is educate other people that aren't as aware as to what is really going on in the world, whether it's false flags, just current events. I'm using that in a broad sense. That education is a very important tool, but it's also not enough. You can't change the system just by educating other people as to what the system is, right? Webster Tarpley, I've heard him say that opinions count for nothing. What counts is coordinated political action. And that's true because you look at 9/11, for instance. In 2013, the amount of people who know what happened, or at least know that the official story isn't true about 9/11, that number is exponentially greater than it was in 2001. But so what? What have we done about that? Nothing. Because we've educated a lot of people, and we've won, maybe won on the education issue. We've won on the opinion issue, but there's been no coordinated political action. So you can win on opinions all day long, and opinions don't really count for anything if they're not put into practice. So what you have to do is coordinate action, and you can't do that based on a series of complaints. Look at the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement has tried that, to have a movement based on complaints and no solutions, to get out in the streets and chant, "We don't like it, we don't like it," over and over. What did that get them? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So what you need is a set of demands. If you're going to go out and protest, if you're going to go out and try to have some kind of mass movement, you've got to have a set of demands that you can agree on. It was Frederick Douglass.
That's very true. In the case of Occupy, it didn't come along until much after when they actually started giving coverage or getting coverage rather, and they're kind of like, okay, wow, well, we're established, we're something now, we're all over the mainstream news networks. Now we have to figure out what we actually want. And they should have been saying those things from day one, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Right, but even their demands turned into nothing really tangible. It was fractured, for one thing, because all the different groups that were taken over and co-opted. But the main demand was to camp in the park. This was,
they were very non-specific, even when they were specific. I mean, if you asked, okay, well, will you advocate, the reinstating of Glass-Steagall? They'd be like, yeah, well, some of us want that, but others don't, so we're kind of wishy-washy on that too,
Right, and it never could get off the ground with any demands, because as soon as somebody put out demands, there were other people screaming, "We don't want demands," because this makes us part of the establishment. Well, as I was saying, Frederick Douglass said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand," and that's absolutely correct. You cannot demand a change if you're not clear as to what you're demanding. So what we have to do is we're going to have to work together on this. I know this sounds kind of cliche at first. People have been saying this for years, but we have to start really building coalitions of not just of like-minded individuals and groups, but of groups and individuals that are further afield, who may not be as aware of some of these things as we are. We have to do so in a way that these groups and individuals are able to retain their own independence and retain their own individuality, but still exhibit a united front in this situation when they go out to demand and to get active. Now, an example of that would be the Syriza party in Greece. These a lot of people might not know what's going on with Syriza, but this was a coalition similar to what I'm talking about here of parties, political parties, unions, different groups and organizations, different people.
If I can jump in very quickly, Richard Cottrell has actually written about them quite a bit for End the Lie, so if people just search that, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it's Syriza. Is that how it's spelled?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, yeah, if people just type that in or, use a search engine, I'm sure they'll be able to find it, but I'm sorry, please continue.
Yeah, so there's Syriza, and all of these groups that made Syriza up, these different organizations, unions, and parties, so forth, on their own, they counted for they were virtually irrelevant. They had no political influence. They were fringe. They were very weak. On their own, they wouldn't even get 1% of the vote. But once they came together as that coalition on a series of demands that they all put together collectively and presented it under the umbrella of Syriza, they garnered 40% of the vote in the general election, and that was this past election. Now, they didn't win, but I think going from virtually 0% of the vote to 40% of the vote could be considered a form of a win, at least, because they're going to probably have elections coming up early to mid this year because of the austerity measures that were put into place by the party that did win. Now, the Syriza party did at least two things right. The first thing they did right were a set of demands. They put these demands out, and there's no real reason for us to go into detail of what those demands were, but they were able to garner popular support around this set of demands, and this is what they used as the spearhead for the campaign. And the second thing is they had leadership, and that's with Alexis Tsipras, who was the presidential candidate, although it doesn't actually have to take the forms of over here of a party of a presidential candidate. So that's an example of what worked and is still working over there in Greece. But what do we do in the United States? Now, I want to kind of preface this by saying I'm not a member of this organization or anything, so I'm not really promoting myself here, but there is a coalition that exists in the United States now that is trying to do the same thing that Syriza did in Greece. They're trying to use the same model, and they're trying to do that over here. It's the United Front Against Austerity. I don't know if you've heard about that or not, but they're trying to form a coalition on similar groups, whether it's unions, various political action groups, anti-war groups, natural health groups, these various different groups together under one program to try to unite people and use that as the spearhead to garner some real political change, real political goals. Now, what they're using as some of their signature demands would be the 1% Wall Street sales tax, which I support, the anti-austerity measures program, which I support, the infrastructure rebuilding programs, because these are the types of programs that could garner popular support here in the United States. As much as we'd like to, we can't develop a coalition and a popular movement based around false flag attacks or based on civil liberties, the environment, the war, education. We can't do it because in the case of false flag or things like fluoride, vaccines, so forth, you have to do so much education before you can get people to rally around the cause that you're doubling up on the work, on the obstacles that you have to face. In the case of civil liberties, the environment, education, or even war, there's just unfortunately a lot of apathy, a lack of concern on these issues. So you're not going to get popular support based on this. But in terms of economics, that's something that everybody understands as affecting them personally, and especially the people at the middle class and lower classes will understand that. Now, the other point about the economic situation is that it cannot be built on some Austrian school model. Because the Austrian school is destructive, and it, in my opinion, should go back to Austria. But you have to have it built on some kind of, I have my problems with Roosevelt, but New Deal style reforms. Because if you are trying to get a popular movement going, then it's going to be a hard sell, and it should be a hard sell. As part of your platform being cutting the programs that are keeping a lot of people in this country that you should be using to mobilize for your cause, that you're cutting the programs that might be keeping them alive, whether it's unemployment, food stamps, Social Security, that sort of thing. So I really think we're going to have to throw the Austrian school out the window here, and for many reasons, but this one specifically for these purposes. And when we're talking about a mass movement, it has to be focused on more than just elections. I would hate to believe that any coordinated movement was based around a political campaign or a politician. It's literally the least we can do, and it's literally the least effective. I mean, how many times do we have to try this before we realize that it doesn't work? Even if your guy wins, he almost invariably sells you out in the end. Any political movement, any mass movement is stronger without the parties, whether it's Republican or Democrat. Look at the union strike in Wisconsin. Look at the libertarian movement. The movements are stronger without the parties. These things are set up, they're ingrained, they're etched in stone in the way that they operate. You can't infiltrate them. So the methods must be, yes, education, yes, boycotting and so forth, but also the general strike method. We have to be able to shut things down when we protest and that sort of thing. So it has to be, again, a coalition. And this doesn't have to just be on economics, just on the national level. This is something that should be applied whatever you're working with here. Say if it's vaccines, then come up with a program. Don't just criticize the vaccine itself. What would you do differently in terms of state law, in terms of health, and so forth? Come up with a program. Come up with some demands. And then reach out to other groups and other individuals and say, can you accept these demands? Can you accept this proposal? Work with that person to modify it or that group to modify it, and then unite under that umbrella. Because all of these groups that we have, and they're great, but all these groups that we have count for nothing by themselves. If you have a group with 5 members and another group on the other end of the state with 5 members, they don't really count for much. But if you mobilize everyone under one umbrella, and the deal can be you turn up this many people at our protest or our demonstration or our presentation to whatever committee that we're speaking to, then we'll turn up this many people to yours, as long as it's under this set of demands, under this umbrella program situation. So that's what this article was about. Rahm Emanuel said at one point, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. We're in a crisis, and we know that. Why should they be the only ones to use ordo ab chaos? Why should they be the only ones to create order out of chaos? We have that ability, too. We have the ability to convey to the average person that you're in a crisis, and this is what is happening, and this is what could happen. We're very good at that, as I said earlier. But now it's time for us to provide the solutions to this crisis and to organize based on the crisis. They've given us the crisis. Let's take advantage of it. Now we can get people to mobilize. So I do encourage everybody to check out that article, but also check out the United Front Against Austerity. Againstausterity.org is their website, and they've got a list of the program that they have for the domestic policy and the foreign policy and so forth, and meetup groups and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because the alternative media really does excel at showing the crisis, but not leading or showing the way out of the crisis. And would you say that the place to start is with the United Front Against Austerity? And if so, I mean, what is their step one? Is it nationalize the Federal Reserve? I see that's one of the lead things there on their website. Is that one of the starting points, or is it kind of a platform and they want to move forward on the entire platform?
Well, there's an entire platform, but there are spearhead demands, and the spearhead demand for the UFAA is the 1% Wall Street sales tax. And nationalizing the Fed is part of that, but the 1% Wall Street sales tax is Basically, a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that Wall Street pays no tax, or virtually no tax. The Wall Street paid no corporate income tax. Wall Street also pays no sales tax. There is a very minuscule amount of tax that goes to fund the Securities Exchange Commission, but that's minuscule, and that just funds the SEC. If you go out to buy, whether it's shoes, clothes, or whatever, on your own, you go out and you pay here in South Carolina at 7 or 8%. Other places, it's like 12%. I think California is 12% or 13% in some places. You pay that tax on every transaction. Wall Street has quadrillions of trades that go through computers, these flash trades, E-trade, electronic trading, and so flash trading, that sort of thing, quadrillions of trades. They pay no tax on that. If you were to place 1%, and most of this stuff, by the way, is derivatives. It's not even productive, or financial trades really aren't productive anyway, but most of these things are just absolute toxic crap. It's derivatives. You put a 1% tax on that, and the estimation is that you'll get somewhere in the many trillions of dollars worth of revenue. Right there's your social safety net. Right there, there's your social safety net. That solves much of those problems. But I don't think that most people are aware that these banks pay no tax on this sort of thing. So that is an example of a signature demand, right? Because that's something you can get popular support around, especially if the average person is paying through the nose just on sales tax, but the banks pay nothing. And this type of tax was spread around by other groups, and they called it the Tobin tax. Nobody knows who Tobin is. They called it the Robin Hood tax. That's an utterly stupid name because you get the whole half of the you get the Republican and the reactionary machines that could come out and say that they're robbing the working people to give to the people who don't work, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It has the theft connotation, and I was actually just glancing at the article on againstausterity.org written about it, and Webster Tarpley points that out exactly. He says, quirky names like Robin Hood tax appear designed to fail, and it really does seem that way.
Yeah, it does. And this is an example, though, of one thing that we can do if people are concerned about the social safety net. You don't have to raise taxes on working people or the middle class or even wealthy industrialists. Just put 1% tax on flash trading, e-trading of derivatives, and these computer sales of derivatives. And there's your social safety net, and that problem is solved. Now, of course, some of the derivatives that you tax, because the nature of the tax, they'll tend to go down, but that's fine. They're derivatives. Well, you don't want them anyway. They're destructive. That's what brought on the 2008 crash. So it's a win-win in that situation. The nationalized Fed issue, that's another one. It's keeping the national bank, keeping the infrastructure of the Federal Reserve as the national bank. So you'll have this infrastructure that can buy bonds, that can issue 0% interest loans to states and federal projects and that sort of thing. It's not going out and just ending the Fed so you can turn the entire monetary system over to private banks. I don't understand quite what just end the Fed thinks it will do, but it's keeping the infrastructure so you can rebuild your physical public infrastructure and maintain various programs in the country.
That's a great point, and interestingly, they put a pretty hilarious response, I think, on the We the People website, at the WhiteHouse.gov site about calls for greater Wall Street reform, and they just avoided the major issues entirely. The petition they were responding to was actually about separating the banks, as Glass-Steagall did, but their idea of reform, the Obama, by there I mean the Obama administration's idea of reform, is creating a single consumer watchdog agency whose sole job is looking out for working families by protecting them from deceptive and unfair lending practices, blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's just laughable. But requiring banks to hold more capital, so when they make a bad bet, they pay for it, not taxpayers. Well, I'd like to see that actually happen, preventing any financial company like AIG from posting such risk to our economy that we have no choice but for taxpayers to bail them out. But of course, that hasn't happened either. Increasing transparency by bringing the $600 trillion derivatives market, which was at the center of the financial crisis, and other trading out of the shadows. I've yet to see that happen. And holding CEOs accountable by taking back bonuses and compensation from failing CEOs, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, this is just, they're avoiding the issue entirely. And stuff like the Wall Street tax would be absolutely huge. I mean, that's the thing. But what do you make of the people who say this kind of stuff is just, more of the same? Really. I mean, I've heard, I'm sure you heard the exchange between Adam Kokesh and Webster Tarpley. I'm not sure if you were on the show that day. It was a while ago, but we played some clips from it, and basically it was just Adam Kokesh saying to Webster Tarpley, "Oh, you're a statist, Marxist, use several buzzwords like that." And Webster Tarpley made the points, people will die if they don't have access to these government services. But what do you say to people who say, this is just more of the same. This is Marxism in a fancier package, or similar accusations?
Well, I don't quite understand, and this is not to knock either one, because I agree with both Kokesh and Tarpley on some things and disagree with them on others. But when you have, when people want to claim things like 1% sales tax is Marxism, I mean, when you say buzzword, that's exactly what it is. It's coming from, again, this Austrian school theory. It's never actually worked in principle. From the times that the Austrian school, and I say that in terms of the concept, when we're talking about the golden age, right, that early 1900s, late 1800s, when we had weave room girls, when we had people working 16 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, that, I guess, was not Marxism, but it's also not something that I want to go back to. I don't quite understand what was so great for that period of time, unless you were a Rockefeller or a Rothschild or J.P. Morgan. Yeah, it was great if you were an industrialist, if you were a banker, just like today. It was great for them, and it's great to look back and look at these times and think that they were nice and quaint, but they were not. That is why you had the labor movement, because there are some things that people cannot continue to bear. I hear a lot of times where people look back at the 1950s as the golden age of America. This is when we were at our best, and this comes from a lot of people who put forth Austrian school ideals. Right? Well, what was the 1950s? What was this golden age? It was the tail end of the New Deal. It's not Austrian school. It was Roosevelt's New Deal. And I have my own problems with Roosevelt, but this was not Austrian school. The Austrian school didn't give us anything except monopolies and low wages, low living standards. So all of this stuff, people should remember. This comes from the Mount Pelerin Society. This is one of the places where this Austrian school economics really started to gain credence and be pushed, and that was funded by Rockefeller, so the Rockefeller family. So I would look very closely at I would take a very skeptical view of any Austrian school economics, or also the claims that just anything that's not borderline anarchistic is socialism. I mean, enough's enough on that. I don't understand where it's supposed to end. So I guess that's my take on that. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, well, one thing I see, and I think definitely making the Federal Reserve no longer a private banking cartel makes complete sense. Whereas just ending the Fed, I'm not sure. When people say end the Fed, like you said, what happens next? Okay, end the Fed. The Fed's done with, hypothetically. Then what? What's step one after that? That's the real question to me. And I think some people, it's funny, if they say, if they're, as you said, borderline anarchistic or anarchistic in their economics, and hold to the Austrian school type ideals. As far as I can tell, I haven't actually spoken in detail to someone who holds to Austrian school type ideals and says just flatly end the Fed. I wonder what the next step is. Is it more privatization, or do they actually hold to a kind of nationalization of the Federal Reserve? It seems like the only alternative to a private banking cartel would be nationalized, but then that would seem to go against the kind of anarchistic Austrian school ideals, because then you have a state-run institution right there, and that just sounds like anathema to the Austrian school. But one thing that concerns me about it, while I agree it's coming under the control of the Treasury if it's nationalized, but we know the Treasury is just a revolving door for Wall Street, especially Goldman Sachs. So what would stop it from just becoming, yet another way for Goldman Sachs to exploit the government if it was under Treasury control and controlled by laws, passed by Congress and signed by the president, as I see here. I mean, it's great in principle, but that is if we actually had people working for us in government, which doesn't seem to be the case right now. So what would your response to that be? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Well, no, well, you mentioned Goldman Sachs. Well, one of the parts of this program, by the way, is seize Goldman Sachs. It's insolvent. It's a zombie bank, right? So they're propped up by derivatives. If they're propped up at all, they need to be seized and liquidated. So you eliminated the Goldman Sachs issue. But you also have to start somewhere, right? If we can nationalize the Federal Reserve and return it under the Treasury, I mean, you can also use that argument about Congress coining and printing money. You could also say that at least three quarters, I would actually say all of the members of Congress are owned by Wall Street. So what's to prevent them from just doing Wall Street's bidding? Yeah, that's another step that we're going to have to go through, and to make sure that this doesn't continue. But it's a major step forward if you nationalize the Federal Reserve.
Indeed, and I think it would cause a ripple effect if that 1% tax, even with that's such a small percentage, when we're talking about such massive trades and constantly going on, it would be a kind of ripple effect and would reduce the amount of lobbying funds and campaign funds that they can provide to get their candidates in office, which unfortunately is exactly what they do all too easily currently. But I mean, what I'm struggling with here is how do we get people to actually come together? I mean, I know we've seen it take place in other countries, but what's stopping people from doing it in the United States? That's what seems to really get at me. It's I just can't understand why people can't say, okay, well, I'll marginalize my pet issue while we work on something we can all agree on right now, and then once we make these larger reforms that help everyone, then we can go back to pushing our issue. You know what I mean? What is that thing that's holding us back right now?
Well, I think for the longest time, one of the biggest problems was a lack of an umbrella front to begin with. There was nobody there to say, here's the demands, here's the procedures that we want to follow. There's all these other groups who refuse to work with one another for all these various egotistic reasons. So there's a million reasons why it hasn't taken off in the United States. But again, I would say one of the reasons is that the infrastructure for the movement was non-existent up until now. The UFAA, by the way, is made up of a bunch of groups. A lot of them agree on a lot of things. A lot of them don't. A lot of them don't even like each other. And I think that's the key, is coming up with the program and presenting that in a way that if you can accept the program, then you can be a part of this movement, and you don't have to lose your individuality. Now, you're right when you say you look at places like Greece, Spain. As far as I know, in Spain there is not a centralized, organized resistance. I could be wrong, although there is a UFAA meetup in Spain. But at least they're out in the streets, and they have been for some time. Here, there is none of that. I think a lot of that is a public propaganda issue, where people are taught to hate their own benefits and social safety net, where Medicare is evil for people who don't work, except when I get old and I need it. Same thing with Medicaid. Food stamps is for lazy people who live off of the government, except when I'm out of work and I need it, and it's important. This is something that's been propagandized through media for years and years and years, at least since the 80s. It's been heavy propaganda. So when you're talking about economics, I think that's one of the reasons you have so many groups, so many different unions, for instance, who are corrupt at the top in their own right. I'm not going to pretend that unions are perfect, but you have so many different groups. The Nurses United Union, you have the AFL-CIO, and they're not necessarily working together. And that's somewhat of a leadership issue, of a co-opting of the leadership. But I think there's a million reasons why it's not taken off as much here in the United States. But I think the infrastructure is there now, and if we can take advantage of it, then I think I could see a way out of this. Because it's like I was saying earlier, if we're not going to fight back, if we're not going to at least try, if we're going to keep waiting for the perfect presidential candidate, don't hold your breath. If you're going to keep waiting on the perfect group that comes up and agrees with you on everything 100%, we can all get behind it, and everybody will agree with it and join. Or if we all just pull out of the system and it all collapses and we can start anew, then if these are the things that we're waiting on, I think we're going to be. I think we're heading down the wrong path. We'll be waiting a long time if we don't start to try and get some wins in our column now. Then if we're going to sit around and just chatter about what's happening to us day in and day out, then maybe we should just pull back and relax and enjoy the time we have. Because if we're going to lose, then at least let's have a ball while we have some time. So I think this is why I've been promoting the UFAA, is that we have this infrastructure that we can take hold of, and if we can work with other people. And it doesn't have to just be the UFAA. Again, whatever your interest is, if you have an anti-vaccine group or anti-fluoride group or chemtrail group, link together, get a program, get a path forward, and get with these other groups and these other individuals and work with them. I know egos are a problem, God knows, but you can even work with the egos as long as you have the program, and you can pull people into your program and provide and present a united front in this issue. And of course, different cross sections can work with one another as well. So it's time to do something now with what we've got. You don't go into battle with the army that you want. You go into the battle with the army that you have. That's I think that was Rumsfeld. I hate to quote him for my purposes, but there he is. This is what we have, and we have to work with that.
Yes, and like you said, there will never be any perfect coalition, and you'll be waiting your entire life if you wait for that perfect politician to get behind, and then someone will find something wrong with him or her. So we really do have to move forward now, because, in my opinion, if we just sit around and keep pointing out the flaws but not saying what we can do to actually change things, we're just going to continue sliding down the increasingly slippery slope. If we make no uphill progress whatsoever, I just think there's no reason to believe that we won't continue sliding down that hill. But to talk about some of your other coverage, because you have done quite a bit of writing recently, what are your thoughts on the Illinois gun ban legislation? I see you wrote an article about that, and it has also been incredibly popular. So would you like to discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, there was an email that was sent out by Bravo Company, which is one of the largest manufacturers of the AR-15 in the country, and it came from the Illinois State Rifle Association originally, about the fact that they had some sources saying that there would be a submission to the Illinois State Congress by the State Senate President John Cullerton, and it was going to be an assault weapons ban, and they were going to submit it on Wednesday, January 2nd. Now, they did. This was during the lame duck session. And I've actually done an article on Governor Quinn before. Governor Quinn of Illinois, he is a notorious gun grabber. But the Illinois State Rifle Association claimed in the email that almost every gun that you own is going to be banned under this bill if it passes, and it would be subject to confiscation by the state police. So just to look at what they said about the bill, it said it would be all semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and shotguns, as well as pump-action shotguns and 1911 based pistols. Right. So I did a write-up on that and put it out on Activist Post, and it turns out that they did, in fact, submit that to the Illinois State Congress, and then I found out today that it made it through the committee. So it's going to the full Senate, or the amount of people who are actually in the Senate. That's, I think, the worry, is that only select people will be there to vote on it. So there were some things that the Illinois State Rifle Association said that you could do if you were concerned about the gun bill, and that was call your state senator, and I think they have, there's the Illinois State Board of Elections, which is, the phone number is 217-782-4141. That's 217-782-4141. You can call and find out who the state representative is, and let them know that you're not fond of bills that are violating the Second Amendment and your constitutional and basic human rights. And, of course, you can contact Illinois State Rifle Association and see what you can do for them as well. But some of the things that I've been hearing from the anti-gun crowd, it's just unbelievable the level of ignorance that you hear from these people. I have many friends who are anti-gun, and they're great people. They're just ignorant on this issue. Terms like assault weapons, the semi-automatics. This stuff terrifies these people because they've sat around and watched television for years, which oddly enough they don't mind doing, watching constant violence and constant gunfire on television. But in real life, the idea of somebody who owns a gun, keeps it in their bedroom for self-defense, terrifies them.
Isn't it funny how that works? They love to watch TV violence, but the idea of someone actually having a gun locked up somewhere in their home is absolutely terrifying. It's a very odd concept, to say the least. But I'm sorry, please continue.
Yeah, it is. And, I should say maybe I'm a little more radical, but I do not, unless you've got kids running around, I do not advocate for guns to be locked up. It doesn't do you any good when your gun's locked up and, with lock and chain when you're in an emergency situation. But these things like assault weapons, that's such a scary term. It conjures up M60s and such. Well, assault weapons, it might surprise a lot of people, aren't actually bazookas and anti-tank missiles. Assault weapons actually are just basically cosmetic changes, like pistol grips on a shotgun. It's the same shotgun, it's just a pistol grip. Or maybe a barrel cooler at the end of the barrel to keep the barrel from overheating or keep it from burning your hand. Very simple cosmetic things that have nothing to do with the power of the gun, with the rapid fire of the gun. They have no idea. They have no idea that this is the case. They have no idea that semi-automatic doesn't mean a machine gun, even though it says semi-automatic. It means semi. That's a prefix. It means not fully automatic, right? So they think a semi-automatic is a machine gun because you can pull the trigger and then pull the trigger again, another bullet comes out. That's how it's supposed to work.
That's just scary to me that people would actually be ignorant enough to confuse the two.
Believe it or not, I've actually had to point that out to people, that semi-automatic doesn't mean fully automatic because it says semi. Magazines or something else that scares people because they've been watching military movies and all the military guys just unload. They just put these magazines in machine guns and then they can fire it. It never runs out of bullets. It just keeps firing. So that's the way it happens in real life.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
ultra realism.
Right. And these are things that people don't even understand. Look at Connecticut. Connecticut already had an assault weapons ban. Didn't do any good. And we could go into all of those statistics and all the laws about how these stupid gun laws do not reduce gun violence and so forth by criminals, because the funny thing about criminals is they don't actually obey the law, hence the name criminal.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. They just tend to break the law, those criminals. But I do actually want to get into some of those issues because one thing I'd like to hear your take on this. One thing I hear constantly is we need to close the so-called loophole, basically monitor all private sales of firearms, which is what happens at gun shows and stuff like that. What's your take on that? Because that's one of the most constant thing I hear, other than the assault weapons ban, which of course didn't stop Columbine and won't stop anyone who wants to actually commit a killing. If you're a maniac essentially, or you're a criminal and you want to get your hands on guns, whatever kind of gun it may be, you will do it because you're breaking the law, you can deal with the criminal element. That will just happen. So to me, it's kind of a non-issue. But what is your take on the whole so-called loophole of gun shows and private sales in terms of background checks? I mean.
Well, it's a shame they didn't monitor the weapons of Fast and Furious as much as they want to monitor mine.
I know, but that's the government. They can do whatever they want. Come on now.
Yeah. So you have a right. The Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This whole registration stuff, I hear from a lot of people. They won't get my guns. I hear a lot of tough talk on the internet, person to person. It's all a lot of tough talk until it comes down to the wire. Most people that talk this way, maybe they don't quite put two and two together, that registration is just the first step before confiscation. Now, my take, by the way, just to answer your question simply, is that I oppose background checks for individual sales. I actually oppose background checks for the sale of weapons, period, because if you're out in the country, you're an American citizen, you have a right to own a weapon. And that includes convicted felons who are out of prison. If they're a danger to society, then they shouldn't be out of prison, and that's a fault of the court system, not a fault of the Second Amendment. So that's where I stand on that. I have no doubt that they'll probably get a lot of this agenda through. But for all the tough talk about that they won't get my guns, you've been registering them for years. And the last time I checked, there was an assault weapons ban for years. I think it was 1994 when it was passed. Why could they get your guns then and not now? Are we really to believe that if laws are passed that confiscation is allowed, that they won't get your guns? I'm sorry. There's a lot of tough talk, but again, I need to see some action on this front. There are a lot of people have been lulled into complacency because this issue has come up several times after every mass shooting, which I have millions of questions about these shootings, whether it's Newtown, whether it's the Aurora Batman shooting. I tried to refrain from saying too much about them, but I believe that they are false flags. So, after each one of these, there's another push for gun control, more gun control, more gun control, and it seems to stay at the back of the minds of some people, then it fades away. So there's a sense of being lulled into complacency, which happens on a variety of issues. And the recent Newtown shooting just put it back into the mainstream, and there seems to be going for broke on this one. So I wouldn't doubt if we would see another mass shooting, with, of course, with little kids thrown in for good measure. I wouldn't doubt if we see that in the future.
By the way, we just have a few more minutes here until we're going to break for the first hour. But when we come back, I do want to hear some of the questions you have about Newtown, because I've heard various things brought up, some much more speculative than others, some very valid, others somewhat absurd. So I'd like to hear what your take on it is, because obviously you are a very capable researcher and a discerning one. So I do look forward to that when we come back. But in your opinion, should we just have really follow the Second Amendment word for word? As in, you have the right to keep and bear arms, no caveats, that's it. Is that your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the stupid Piers Morgan comment about muskets, right? The Second Amendment was written at a time where people had muskets. Yeah, that's true, and so did the military. That's what the military had. They had muskets. So if you transpose that logic to today, then the Second Amendment means that we can have M60s. fully automatic M60s, hasn't it? So
yeah, Black Hawk helicopters, because back then they had horses and we had horses. That kind of logic. They had bayonets, we had bayonets. Therefore, we can have destroyers and anti-aircraft missiles. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm sure the Syrian rebels appreciate that kind of stuff, but that we don't mind shipping over to them. But again, one other thing I want to dispel is that that people own machine guns. That's another thing. This idea of people owning machine guns. There was a law passed early on in the 20th century. I cannot remember the name of the law or the exact year that it was passed. I'm sure some astute Google users could find it. But it essentially outlawed the ownership of machine guns by American citizens, except that the people who could own them had to jump through a myriad of hoops, meet all these regulations and qualifications, and then register that machine gun on this list or database. Now, in the 1980s, by the way, those qualifications were almost impossible to meet, but by the 1980s, that list stopped taking new applications. So since the 1980s, to my knowledge, you have not been able to go out and buy a machine gun, a fully automatic machine gun, in any capacity. That is the state of machine guns. Now, if you're a pretty smart criminal and you go on the black market, you can most likely find one. But if you're law-abiding American citizen, then not so much.
Yes, and that will always be the case. If you want to break the law, you probably will, and you'll be able to easily circumvent whatever restrictions they put in place. Even a total gun ban, of course, that would just drive all the traffic underground. So that's a great way to create even more criminals. But I have an interesting tweet back and forth conversation I had with a professor who's a professor in Australia, and he's associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. He's senior lecturer in sociology and social policy at the University of Sydney, but he is an American, and he had an article published, and I believe it was truthout.org or a similar website. I might be remembering that incorrectly, but I think that's where he writes is truthout.org. But when we come back from the break, I'll read some of that, and it shows the logic that it goes into this, even from someone who is a senior lecturer and associate fellow. This guy can't be a complete idiot, but you'll see some of the so-called logic that goes into this type of thinking, and I think you especially, Brandon, will get a really big kick out of it. It is very hard to believe, to say the least. But until we come back, stick with us. You are listening to End the Lie Radio. My name is Madison Rupert, and our guest today is Brandon Turbeville of ActivistPost.com. His books are Codex Alimentarius, The End of Health Freedom, 7 Real Conspiracies, 5 Cent Solutions, and Dispatches from a Dissident, all available on thebookpatch.com. He also has his phenomenal show here on UCY.tv. It is called Truth on the Tracks, and you can listen to it over at UCY.tv/TT, and it's every Monday night starting at 9 p.m. Eastern, and we will be back in moments. Of course, my website is endthelie.com. Just scroll on down there to connect with us on various social media platforms, and we will be back in moments. Stick with us.
The brink. We are on the brink, but of what? No one knows. It depends on the reference frame that you're looking at it from.
On the Brink with Jeff Weverson.
We have been nuked. Did you know that? Check out Nuked Radio on UCY.tv Tuesday Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Radchik and Jules. Stay safe, everyone.
UCY.TV. The future is in your hands.
I'm Brandon Turbeville, staff writer for ActivistPost.com. You can catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night at 9 p.m. and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV.
I'm Madison Rupert, the host of End the Lie Radio here on UCY.TV every Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific and 10 p.m. Eastern. Tune in every Monday here on UCY.TV.
You're listening to UCY.TV. Real news, real people.
This is Josh from Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. You can catch me 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Fridays, and catch all the great hosts here on UCY.TV.
Catch Before the First Cup with Jules, Monday through Friday, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time at UCY.TV/BTFC.
And welcome back to this phenomenal episode of End the Lie Radio with Brandon Turbeville of ActivistPost.com. He is the author of several books, including Codex, Alimentarius, The End of Health Freedom, 7 Real Conspiracies, 5 Cents Solutions, and Dispatches from a Dissident. They're all incredible quality and very, very nicely printed, and they are available at thebookpatch.com. That's thebookpatch.com. And he also has a wonderful show here on UCY.TV, and that is called Truth on the Tracks every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, and you can find that at UCY.TV/TT, or you can just go to UCY.TV and you can find it very easily that way. But we covered a lot of ground in the first hour talking about actual solutions, actually making progress towards change, instead of just pointing out all the horrible things that are going on, which I'm definitely guilty of myself, I must admit. And we also talked about gun control legislation, gun control in general, and we're also going to continue with that this hour. But before we get into the subject more deeply, I want to talk a little bit about an article written for truthout.org by a professor, and I talked about him a little bit towards the end of the last hour. His name is Salvatore Babones. I'm probably butchering that. Senior lecturer in sociology and social policy at the University of Sydney in Australia, an associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. And he wrote an article called "Gun Ownership is a Hobby, Not a Right." And what I'm about to read you is serious, folks. Okay, this is what he actually said. But not all hobbies are created equal. Some hobbies are inherently dangerous to ourselves and to others. Sure, some people can use guns safely. Some people can also smoke crack safely, drink and drive safely, and handle explosives safely. We don't let them because too many other people can't. And Brandon made the great point during the break that so the only reason we don't let people smoke crack is because they can't do it safely, and that's the only reason why crack's illegal and all this stuff. But of course, it's absurd. He's muddying the issue like crazy here. He likens smoking crack and drinking and driving with explosives handling. Okay, first of all, yes, people actually do handle explosives safely, and we do let them. But we don't let all people handle explosives safely. That's right. But that is not because of anything other than the fact that explosives are illegal for you to own. Okay, they are, and you really can't liken them to guns at all. Since when are there hobbyist demolition experts? I mean, it's a business when you're in demolition. It's not like you just rig up some claymore mines for home defense. I mean, that's absurd. And then, since when is smoking crack a hobby? That's what I want to know. I mean, this is just absurd. The whole thing is absurd, but it gets even more crazy when I had an interesting exchange with this guy on one of the alternate Twitter accounts I set up just purely for gathering news, and that's at twitter.com/ETL news. And that's not for posting our articles, but posting news source, articles from other places, and just for my own news gathering purposes. But first I asked him, why should we listen to an Australian who wants to do away with the Constitution? He goes, that's funny. My birth certificate, my passport, and my annual tax filings all say I'm American. As if, I'm supposed to know these things. And so I say, okay, that's great to know, and so on, but why is gun ownership a hobby and not a right? And I say, so why don't we consider free speech a hobby? How about due process? And then I kind of make a snarky remark, oh, wait, that's already gone thanks to the National Defense Authorization Act. And his problem or his approach, it might not even be a problem, might be intentional, but he doesn't answer questions. He says, let me ask, if the Constitution didn't happen to mention guns, would you consider them a basic right? Other countries don't. And I say, that's a complete red herring, and I'm sure you realize it. You're ignoring the issue at hand. It does mention guns, period. At least be even-handed with your nonsensical argumentation. Are you arguing that free speech is a hobby and not a right? And then he replies, if you think gun ownership is a basic human right on par with free speech, we have really nothing to talk or shoot about. And he says, this is the key here. I don't deny that the U.S. Constitution, as currently interpreted by a right-wing Supreme Court, guarantees you the right of gun ownership. Let's comment on that very briefly. Brandon, do you think it's a matter of interpretation? Do you think any Supreme Court, right-wing, left-wing, up-wing, down-wing, who cares, would they ever be able to read the Second Amendment and interpret it in a way that says you don't have a right to keep and bear arms?
Well, they've certainly tried their best over the last few years, but I think if you're using any level of common sense and any level of honest intellect, then you can't interpret it as anything other than guaranteeing the rights of the American people to own firearms. The most common argument that I hear from that side of the debate, which, by the way, there shouldn't even be a debate. Your basic rights aren't up for debate. But is that the militia clause, right? A well-regulated militia. But here's the deal. These people don't understand what a militia is. The militia is not the United States Army or the National Guard. The militia is the American people who own weapons and who go about their business and, when needed, bring those arms out and defend themselves and their communities, their states, their country, and so forth. It's again, we could use the Piers Morgan logic with that and say, go back and look what a militia was in 1787, 1776, and see what that is. They're not the military. They're the militia. That's why they're called the militia. But this is logic. I love the smoking crack safely comment. That's perhaps he should go around teaching people all across the country how to do that, because I don't think crack smokers have yet learned how to do that safely. I'm sure they'd like to know, though. So yeah, I mean it's completely illogical. I've argued this with people before. It's a travesty when the government cracks down on free speech, when the government cracks down on due process, on the First Amendment, on the Fourth Amendment, but not on the Second. For some reason, it's not a travesty when that happens. we could go into the clear historical parallels of other countries that have been disarmed and what's happened ever since then. I mean, you can look at Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, Communist China, for starters, many others that have disarmed their citizens, and you can see what followed. If I'm not mistaken, Australia has had a pretty high-profile incident with the I'm blanking now. It was a cultural hero over here at some point. A crocodile.
Dundee, that guy?
Yes, Crocodile Dundee, yeah.
Or was it the guy who was speared through the heart, that guy?
No, it was the other one, Dundee.
Okay.
Who I believe, or the movie was based on a real guy, who actually was pro the Australian version of the Second Amendment, and if I'm not mistaken, he died trying to defend that amendment. So people should go look into the Australian history, that great history of disarmament. So that's the first step, of course. I heard, Michael Moore come out and basically say, if you want to own a gun, then you're a racist. Big surprise. Michael Moore calls you a racist if he disagrees. But let's not forget. I mean, he doesn't explain what all those black people who own guns, how they're racist, against black people. That doesn't work for his point, so he just admits that. But
yeah, like the black guy who brought, I believe it was what most people would call an assault rifle to a political rally, and it made this, it was this big hoopla. But of course, they couldn't, use these, they couldn't be like, oh, he's an ultra right wing Nazi, whatever. But do you remember this? This was a while ago. I think it might have even been an Obama rally.
Yeah, I remember the guy that went there. I think he had it strapped on his back.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder what Michael Moore would say to that guy.
He would ignore it. He's Michael Moore. He ignores things that don't work for his point.
Exactly.
So, but the first gun laws, really, in the United States were against black people because they were afraid that if free black people had weapons that could defend themselves, that they wouldn't be able to oppress them. Right. So this is if you want to go with the racial aspect, and it's the gun control itself that has the racial history. But again, it doesn't work for Michael Moore's point. So there's no need to address the issue, especially when you're speaking to fellows at the MSNBC community.
Yes, exactly. And I was really surprised because I'd read some good stuff from Truth Out, but apparently they also publish some garbage. If people want to find it, again, it's Gun Ownership is a Hobby, Not a Right, published on the 18th of December 2012. But it is an opinion editorial, so maybe they give people a lot of room there. Personally, I don't like to tell people what they can and can't write about. So if someone submits a story I don't agree with, I'll still publish it. So, maybe they take a position like that on the issue. But, I think it's good to have this kind of stuff out there because then you can see how not to broach an issue. And this is how he sums up the whole article. Gun ownership is a great hobby. It was fun while it lasted, but easy access to guns is incompatible with daily life in 21st century society. There are no bandits on the prairie. There are no wolves at the door. It's time to get rid of guns. If that means a 28th change to the Constitution, so be it. It's worth it. What is your take on that, Brandon? Is that really why we have guns? Because we think there's bandits on the prairie, wolves at the door? Is that a realistic view of what people who recognize the value of the Second Amendment and why it should be protected? Is that really what they believe?
Well, no, it's not. It's quite ridiculous. We could go into all the reasons that gun ownership is good, but you could also say that that you turn that logic around on him. we have freedom of speech. So I could say very hateful things and incite people to hate other people, right? So that, and hatred of other people who are different from me, or that's incompatible with life in the 21st century. So should we do away with the First Amendment, as you ask him? You know, this is something we could look at according to his logic. The answer to that from him would probably be no, but he's terrified of weapons, so in terms of the Second Amendment, the answer is yes. The Second Amendment, of course, was never about hunting. It was never about hobbies. I guess you could target shoot. I guess that's a hobby, whatever. But it was always about self-defense. It was always about self-defense against, bandits, against people who would do you harm in lots of other ways. And it was also against governments. Let's not forget that either. So if you want to look at that in terms of cultural history. So the entire argument is completely illogical and silly. And, apparently the only danger that exists are people... You know what, let me just take this somewhere else for a minute. I hear so many gun owners that complain about the anti-gun agendas and so forth, and say, look, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm a gun owner. I obey the law. Or it's fast approaching the point where being law-abiding is not something to necessarily be proud of anymore, all right? Because if they take your rights and make them against the law, and you abide by it, what does that say about you? What does that say about your own morals and your own willingness to stand up for your rights? There were laws in Nazi Germany against hiding Jews. All right, so if you were law-abiding in Germany, that shouldn't be looked at as a compliment. There were laws in communist China and Soviet Russia and all these other places that had genocides. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good person, and not obeying the law does not necessarily mean that you're a bad one. So it's going to come to a time, to a situation soon, where a lot of people are going to have to make some decisions. Do we continue to obey the law and then try to use that, the fact that we obey the law as some kind of hedge for our arguments to change it, or is it about time that we start resisting? And I'm not calling for violence here. I'm not doing that. But at some point, you can no longer obey these oppressive laws. If they're gonna outlaw your guns, maybe it's time to become an outlaw. If they're going to make gun ownership a crime, well then. Maybe the gun grabbers need to understand that gun owners may become criminals. And again, it's going to get misinterpreted from people who are listening to this. I'm not calling for shootouts or any stupid thing like that.
Well, I think you can apply it to something that is clearly a nonviolent action of breaking the law. Say there is no more free speech. He talks about, it's an amendment. That's the idea of an amendment. It wasn't there originally. Like, great point. So was the First Amendment. That was a change. So following his logic, again, we could have free speech completely eradicated. Let's say that happens. Would people say, look down upon people for actually exercising free speech? Say they took away free speech and you can only say positive things about the every single politician and everything they do. Would people really look down on people and say, you're a disgusting criminal for criticizing something like, the Obama administration saying it's illegal to assassinate Americans while never actually having to explain why it's illegal to assassinate Americans? I think that might be, something that people can grasp more, because this is a charged issue. You do see people get fired up over this because some people realize that guns aren't inherently bad and dangerous and some horrible menace to society, while others actually think that. But I totally agree with you. But this guy really, it's amazing the things he says. Towards the end, he actually contradicts himself. In this tweet conversation we had, he originally said that the Constitution, as currently interpreted by a right-wing Supreme Court, guarantees you the right to gun ownership. Fast forward a little while, he says, I think I clearly acknowledge the legal status of the Second Amendment, but constitutions can change and should change over time. So now he's saying it actually is in the Constitution, and it's not a matter of interpretation. Later, he says, I don't dispute that gun ownership is currently protected by the U.S. Constitution. I just think it's silly and stupid. This is his argument. And also, there are rights that have no amendments and amendments that are not rights. Universal Declaration of Human Rights doesn't mention guns. This is his argument. Do you think this is something that we'll see increasingly? Because this was a popular article. I saw it passed around quite a bit. That's why I actually came across it, and not often in a negative context. What's your take on that argument? That he also used this claim. Is something a right because it's in the Constitution, or is a right a moral imperative? I'd say people have a right to clean air. That's his argument. What do you make of this whole line of argumentation coming from this guy? And keep in mind, people, this is not some random guy on Twitter or posting on his blog spot. This is a senior lecturer in sociology and social policy at the University of Sydney in Australia, not a small school, not some community college in the middle of nowhere, and he's an adjunct part-time professor, of some random subject. No, and he's an associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. So, what do you make of all of this, Brandon?
Well, I've actually heard individuals in academic circles actually claim that the Second Amendment actually prohibits American citizens from owning guns. So the ridiculous nature of this just knows no bounds, and I don't think that it's going to turn around anytime soon. Yeah, you're right. He does contradict himself a couple times over. It just shows you, though, how I love how he says, I don't discount the fact that it is a right under the Constitution. I just think it's silly and stupid. Oh well, if this guy thinks it's silly and stupid, then somebody should get on that amendment right away, because this professor thinks it's silly and stupid. Why doesn't he come up with another list of things that he thinks are silly and stupid, so we can also submit that to Congress as well and get right on that? So let us all subject our basic rights to his interpretation. Well, the fact is, you have human rights. Yes, they are moral imperatives, but you also have rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, and you don't play around with those rights. You lose one, you lose the rest of them. We've seen it. The right to due process has disappeared. The Supreme Court just ruled that the Obama administration doesn't have to explain why it killed the 16-year-old son of Anwar al-Awlaki.
It was actually the appeals court judge who was ruling on the lawsuits brought forth by the ACLU in the New York Times. It didn't even make it to the Supreme Court. It didn't even make it that far. But they're saying they're going to appeal it again. So maybe it will make it that far. But this, keep in mind, this is Supreme Court who says you can be strip searched and cavity searched for being arrested and booked on any crime whatsoever. But unfortunately, it hasn't made it all the way up there yet.
Well, yeah, that's all right. Good. The appeals court. But yeah, hopefully it would make it to the Supreme Court. But like you said, they've made so many other rulings before. Then I don't feel confident in anything they do. The Supreme Court, as I said before, at one point the Supreme Court ruled that black people weren't humans. So I respect the procedures, but at some level I really don't care what the Supreme Court says. We have a right to own weapons. Black people are humans, and that is that. We have a right to free speech and due process. And if the Supreme Court wants to side in that manner, well, then they can side with the destruction of civil liberties and constitutional rights if they want. But then, we're going to have to do something about that. And hopefully, people start to see that. Also, I want to mention that a new organization has popped up here in South Carolina. Palmetto Gun Rights has just popped up in South Carolina. It's a statewide organization that is working to promote the Second Amendment, the maintenance of the Second Amendment in the state and the country, and their platform is no compromise at all. So the NRA usually gets a lot of attention for standing up for gun rights, and they do some of that, but the NRA is not what it should be. The NRA likes to compromise way too much. The NRA likes to play way too much politics, and fundamentally, I don't really trust the NRA and the way they do business. There are some other organizations out there. I think Gun Owners of America has been much more stalwart in their defense of the Second Amendment, even though I think there's some things I disagree with Larry Pratt on other issues, but nevertheless they've stood firm when it comes to the Second Amendment. And there needs to be no compromise. There needs to be. I even saw gun owners after this Newtown shooting say things like, "Well, we shouldn't ban guns altogether, but I do understand why people don't need assault weapons." Again, even people who own guns don't understand the terminology, and it's not about hunting. It is not about shooting deer. It is although hunting is a part of it, but it's about self-defense from other individuals and self-defense from governments. And it's time people realize that just because they don't like guns doesn't mean that all of our rights get to be destroyed because of their little preferences. I don't like a lot of things that are said, but it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Your rights are not up for debate. They're not up for a popularity contest, and you do not concede. Compromise is the only way to ensure that everybody loses. So that's why there should be no compromise. So that's my take on that in terms of the Second Amendment.
Well, that's a phenomenal point. It really, everybody does lose when you try and make everyone happy. That really is what happens at the end of the day, and that is what they're trying to do here. And it is really it would be a scary state of affairs if the only people with guns were the armed gangs known as the police and the military. That truly would be a scary situation to me. And I'm sure many of the listeners would agree, and I'm sure you would too, Brandon. If that really is what the United States is coming to, and that's what these people want, I'm scared for the future of the United States, really. But a quick update. In the course of this broadcast, we already broke 17,000 on the Facebook page. I honestly don't know what's been going on lately, but it's been growing like crazy. So thank you, all the listeners out there who have been liking and sharing the articles and whatnot. But I'm sorry, Brandon. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that, by the way. I saw a meme that was going around on the internet about the police. When you mentioned that the police and the military being the only groups that are armed, there was a picture of police, armed police, of course, on this armored vehicle, and on the top of it it says, "You don't need a gun, you don't need an assault weapon to hunt deer, but I need this armored tank to direct traffic." And I think that's an accurate portrayal, right? You have armored goons who have tanks. Florence, South Carolina, it's a metropolitan area. It's not that big. They have an armored vehicle. For what? They have two, actually. They've had them for at least 10 years. Armored vehicles, SWAT teams. But yet your rights to own weapons are being shredded right now in the halls of Congress and state Congresses as well.
Yeah, it's hilarious, and in some cases they're not even directing traffic. They're serving warrants, and they need actual tanks for that. It's absolutely hilarious. But in the remaining time here, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Belgian study on so-called chemtrails, or weather modification, geoengineering. If people want to learn more about this and the real facts behind it, go to youtube.com/endthelie and type into the box that says search this channel, just type in Dane, D-A-N-E, and you'll come up with the two interviews we've done with Dane Wigington, who featured prominently in Why in the World and What in the World Are They Spraying. He's phenomenal and really gets to the issues. Michael Murphy, the producer, we also did an interview with him. They have done great work. Why in the World Are They Spraying is the more recent, and it is absolutely phenomenal. Check it out. But Brandon, tell us a little bit about this Belgian environmental study, if you would.
Okay, there was, I've actually done two articles recently on chemtrails, and the one you're referring to, there's a Belgian group, and it's the Belfort group. They commissioned a study to be done on what they call contrails. Now, I'll give you the title of the article, by the way, that you could pull up online. It's entitled "Contrail Science: Its Impact on Climate and Weather Manipulation Programs Conducted by the United States and its Allies." You could read NATO for that, but just if you put that into Google, I actually have a link to it in my article on Activist Post. If you want to go there and click on that, it'll carry you right to it. It's about 70 pages long. And there can be some confusion in that article, in that study, because they refer to these things as contrails, and there's some question as to whether this is a normal contrail or an intentionally sprayed contrail. They could have done a little bit better by calling it persistent contrail, so people will at least know that it was a difference between the contrail that dissipates and the contrail that lingers. But that's easy for me to say, having not done any of the work. So I'm not going to criticize in that regard. Just pointing that out. Basically, they go through 4 different types of man-made clouds. I put clouds in quotes, and they call them contrails, chemtrails, dish trails, and wingtip vortices. The wingtip vortices and dish trails you can disregard. That's natural. It's when a plane hits a certain speed, or when it goes through a stable cloud, it produces a tunnel. What they're concerned with is contrails and chemtrails. And chemtrails, they kind of blend that with the contrail issue. What's most interesting about this is there's only 3 days in history that they've been able to study the United States airspace where there is are no commercial aircraft, and that was 9/11, the day of 9/11 and the days shortly after 9/11. Now, with the exception of some of the Saudi royals being flown back and forth that day, nobody was in the sky because flights were grounded. And what they found was that over that period, there was about a 10 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. The normal values of temperature, particularly in the areas where there's highest air traffic. And when normal traffic returned, there was a temperature drop. Now, they're attributing that possibly to contrails. Again, it's unclear as if whether or not this is normal air traffic or if it's the intentionally sprayed chemical trail. But the Belfort report that I linked to has a long history, and there's two very important things to this report. One is the detailed history that it provided regarding the geoengineering programs and stratospheric modification programs that the United States has been doing since the 40s. And it actually goes back further than that. But it goes back and gives you a little bit of history and a little bit of what the projects were and the results, public results of those projects. And that's about 15 pages worth of history there. So I encourage everybody to go out and read that study. There's also the issue of cirrus clouds, which are the type of clouds that are formed from chemtrails. And this, they deal with the ability of cirrus clouds to have an effect on the Earth's climate, the Earth's temperature, the environment in general, and there's a lot of good sites in that. I want to mention briefly, though, the report that I did before the Belfort Group study, because I think this is actually more enlightening in terms of what's going on now. I did an article entitled Comprehensive Scientific Study Calculates the Cost of Geoengineering. And the funny thing about chemtrails is that for something that doesn't exist, it sure has a lot of scientific studies regarding it. One of those was published in Environmental Research Letters. That's a fairly well-respected journal. And it's entitled, let me see if I can get the title for you. Cost Analysis of Stratospheric Albedo Modification Delivery Systems. This is a study that was done by 3 different researchers. Justin McClellan, who is of Aurora Flight Science Corporation. There's David W. Keith of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences and Kennedy School at Harvard, and Jay Apt of the Tepper School of Business and Department of Engineering and Public Policy of the Carnegie Mellon University. And what they do in this study is they go over all the different variables of the different systems that they could use to deliver 1 to 5 million metric tons of what they call albedo modification material to altitudes of around 18 to 30 kilometers. Now, the albedo modification material, that's aerosols. That's the aluminum oxide, barium oxide, all of that stuff, sulfur dioxide, all of that. And this is a really good scientific study. I mean, they take all the variables into account. And what they look at the existing aircraft that will possibly be developed in the future. They look at using airships. They look at using rocket-powered gliders. They look at using guns, these high-power guns, almost like Navy battleship guns. And they even look at floating space platforms with these pipes that go into space and spread the material. All of this is evaluated pretty detailed manner. And what they determined was that it was cheaper, that the cheapest and most effective way to spread aerosols into the stratosphere is to use existing aircraft. And they even specified the type of aircraft that is that should be used, the cheapest type now. But they also determined, since many people would wonder how much money it would take to engage in a nationwide spraying campaign that we've been seeing actually worldwide, the study determines that the geoengineering operations, the cost of that would be comparable to other what they call large engineering projects or airspace flight operations. But it would be comparable to the yearly operations of a small airline to put this much material into the stratosphere. They compare it. They say actually that it'll be the cost would be much, much, much cheaper to engage in these stratospheric modification programs of the types of spreading aerosol material into the stratosphere than it would be to run FedEx airline or Southwest. And they have all the data to prove it. So you can pull that study up. Again, it's on environmental research letters, and it goes through all of the different variables. But if you think about it, the cost of black projects, the cost of other operations that our government is undertaking, the cost of a FedEx airline or Southwest airline is minuscule compared to some of these other projects. In fact, it wouldn't even have to be as expensive as FedEx or Southwest, as I just mentioned. It would be much cheaper. So it's getting to the point where if you can deny chemtrails, once presented with the evidence, then you're risking the diagnosis of a mental disorder compared to what most people would have considered the chemtrail believers to have had to begin with. But whatever point, the study, the environmental research letter study, actually stated that as early as 1992, the U.S. government was estimating the cost of geoengineering programs, and they actually cite the U.S. National Research Council as proof of that. So they've gone through several studies that they determine that spreading the material at the tropical tropopause, between the tropical and polar tropopause, would be cheaper because that's where much of the air mixes, and where it will have a longer life and have a more even distribution if it's spread in that area. So say what you want about the methods and the motivation behind the study, but the researchers were quite thorough in the study.
Yeah, and you're quite right. You're you're running the risk of being diagnosed with a mental disorder. That's a good way to put it, because it is really delusional to look at this stuff and then continue to be like, that doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. I mean, it really is borderline looking at the sky and saying it's purple just because you want it to be purple. It's really not how the world works. But in your opinion, what is the most major motivation for this? Actually, before I ask that, have you seen why in the world are they spraying?
No, I haven't, and I'm glad you mentioned it because it's on the list. I'd love to see it.
You definitely need to. It's a great one. But I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't quite know. I don't know if it's literally a geoengineering program or if it's a population reduction program. I do know that because these aluminum oxide particles are spread through the atmosphere, you can speculate with HAARP. HAARP frequencies, of course, would resonate higher with the little aluminum particles that are spread throughout the atmosphere. So I don't know if that's I haven't done that much research into that aspect, but essentially you have these little metal particles floating around all in the air, and by the way, you breathe this stuff into your lungs, into your body, so you actually become the conductor for those frequencies as well as your general environment. So if there are HAARP frequencies being beamed out to your area, then and you've been heavily chemtrailed, then you have a higher rate of reception for the frequency. But the ultimate agenda to this, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, unless it's simply a population reduction eugenics scheme where it poisons the water and the food supply and ruins the immune system, as well as just downright annoying to get out and see what should be a blue, sunny day turn into a big, milky covering of a veil over the sky. It's vitamin D reduction, vitamin D3 reduction. There's a whole host of reasons, but I'd definitely be interested in seeing that documentary to see what they propose.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. They actually cover a wide range of reasons, but one of the big ones that I didn't think about is essentially disaster capitalism, where if you can manipulate the weather, you can then bet on the weather. And that is actually, in price futures, basically. That's essentially betting on the weather. Prices will shoot up if there is a massive drought. Excuse me, saying the Corn Belt, for instance. And it decreases corn production, there will be a massive spike in corn prices. So if you bet on that and are able to actually make sure that happens, you got some huge profits in the making there. And it goes on from there. And it is very fascinating to me because they are able to evidence a lot of this. And they really don't get into the more, what I would consider highly speculative ideas, such as mind control type stuff. I think, while sure that could be true, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, the military has, weaponized hallucinations and all this kinds of stuff. It wouldn't surprise me one bit. I just try and stick, especially if I'm trying to show it to other people. I want to make sure it's something that I can say, look, here's the evidence, and here's why it makes sense. And a lot of it just makes a whole lot of sense, disturbingly so. But Brandon, we just have about a few minutes left here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's on your radar in terms of issues? What have you been keeping on top of, and what can we expect from you in the future?
Yeah, well, what I plan to do, and the best laid plans of mice and men, right? But what I plan to do is to be focused more on solutions here in 2013. As I ranted earlier on in the broadcast, that I'm really tired of just repeating what's happening. It's getting really old to repeat what's happening to me and to everyone else every day. I'm ready to get some wins in our column. So that's what I'm going to be focused on, is trying to do what I can to help mobilize for real, tangible victories in different areas, which is why I've been promoting the United Front Against Austerity. I hope to have some other projects finished too in the near future. So I'm hoping to have another book project finished, and probably some other things coming around that I'll just keep under my hat right now. But if anybody wants to support me in that effort, then you can always go to, as you mentioned earlier, thebookpatch.com, or you can go to falseflagpublications.blogspot.com, which is where I have all the books and the covers of the books and the buy now buttons. It's a little bit easier to navigate than searching my name and searching the book titles in the book patch. But, I write regularly for activistpost.com, and you can follow my work there. That helps. And if you're just interested in stuff that I do alone, then you can always go to brandonturbeville.blogspot.com. It's just my backup blog where I repost all the articles and interviews and archived versions of my radio show, which you should also check out. It's ucy.tv/TT, Truth on the Tracks, Monday night and Friday nights at 9 p.m., right before this show, actually. So that's if you want to keep up with what I'm doing, that's the way to do it. And if you want to support me, then buy the books and spread the articles around, and more than anything, get active, form some coalitions, make some connections, get out there and try to make some change. Check out the United Front Against Austerity. Don't just sit around any longer. We can't afford to do that anymore. So build some coalitions, and let's get some wins in our column.
Yes, let's do. I couldn't agree more. And, I must admit, as I did earlier, I'm definitely guilty of that, getting caught up in what's going wrong, but not actually putting forth viable solutions. That is a problem for me. But I think againstausterity.org, they have some phenomenal ideas, and I'm going to have to start making a conscious effort to when I'm writing about these issues, put in not just be like, oh, this is all horrible, but what are some actual realistic changes that could be made. It's a tall order, but I hope a lot of other writers out there in the alternative news realm start doing that as well, because like you said, it's just if we just what was the metaphor you used, writing a journal of everything that's going on essentially, and then just handing it to them, that really is what you're doing ultimately if you make no forward progress whatsoever. And I don't mean to say that I think I'm guilty of putting forth nothing whatsoever, nor are the other people in the rest of the alternative media, but it's definitely not enough. That much is absolutely certain. But once again, people, this has been End the Lie Radio, but this was with Brandon Turbeville of activistpost.com. But again, please check out his show. It does air right before this on Mondays, so if you're listening to UCY.TV, just tune in early on Monday, and you'll be able to listen right on through Brandon's show into my show, and I think you'll definitely enjoy that block of listening. It will be absolutely phenomenally educational for you, that much is certain. But it is called Truth on the Tracks. It is Monday, 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern, and that's, of course, at ucy.tv. And please do buy his books. Brandon actually provided me with one, his latest, Dispatches from a Dissident, and it is phenomenally printed. I mean, this is not junk, printed on like newspaper type paper, pulp type garbage. This is absolutely incredibly high printed stuff. It is high quality printing, I should say, and it is definitely something you want to pick up, because you never know when websites like activistpost.com and endthelie.com will suddenly disappear from the internet, and this kind of content won't be available to you in that format any longer. I don't mean to be a fearmonger, but it really is, it really is a privilege that we enjoy now, but we might not enjoy forever. We do have to realize that. So please do support him, and while you're doing it, you'll be holding on to this information for posterity. Brandon, thanks again so much for coming on. As always, it has been incredibly informative for me. You're one of my favorite guests just because I always learn a ton from you, and I really appreciate it because I know our listeners learned a lot as well. And as he said, these most fundamental rights we've been talking about, folks, about gun control, free speech, stuff like that, they're really not up for debate. They can't be stripped of you. If they do, you are living under an unlawful government. That really is the crux of the issue. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It has been a phenomenal show. Until next time, I'm your host, Madison Rupert of endthelie.com. Be sure to scroll down and check us out on the various social networks, and see you next week. Thanks for listening.